Good evening, everyone. Today is the October 23rd, 2019 meeting of the Animal Advisory Committee. Have all of our members signed in?
Yes, except for Wendy.
Okay, the first thing that we would like to do is have a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Welcome. This is the chairman's statement for anyone who is going to be speaking tonight. The Animal Advisory Committee welcomes comments from citizens about any issue or concern. Your opinions are valued in terms of providing input to the committee members. However, it is requested at the time when you address the committee that comments are not directed personally against a committee or staff member, but rather directed at the issues. This provides a mutual respect between the committee members and the public. When addressing the committee, please state your name and address and speak clearly into the microphone. 3 minutes are allowed for each speaker. Do we have anyone who has signed in? Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Blake Chambliss, second.
Has everyone read the minutes, and do I have an approval for the minutes from the last meeting?
I motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Oops, I did that backwards, didn't I? Okay, the creation of a subcommittee for the nomination of the slate of officers.
Last time.
So this is going first, Gigi?
Yes.
Okay. We did a nominating committee, and we've nominated people by surprise. So hopefully you will all accept a position for the chair. We've asked that Dr. Jillian, if you would be the chair for the AAC for next year, Lon, if you would be the vice chair, and for secretary, either Wendy DePaul or Judy Seltrecht. We could also take nominations from the floor if anyone would like to nominate themselves.
Jillian or Ambula, when do we have to let you know by as far as
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Before the January meeting, right?
Correct.
Because let me think about that so I can kind of, I'm still wrapping my head around everything that's involved here, and I want to make sure if I accept that nomination, I do a good job.
Dr.
Comprehensive job.
Jillian, I know that you could do a good job.
Thanks, I appreciate
can sit here,
that.
I know that you could do so much better than me.
You're too sweet.
Wait a minute, that's what I said about you. Should we just keep getting better and better?
Okay, all right, thank you very much. A report from the subcommittee, review of the original ordinance going back to the original structure of the Animal Advisory Committee. Scott, is that you?
I guess, unless you want to do it. You were there.
Well, I was there, but I didn't write this up.
So, you all have a list of multiple options. We were advised that we should probably present the board with more than one alternative because different commissioners had different opinions as to how they might want to see this structured. So I'd ask you guys to kind of look them over, see if there's any on there that you want to strike off the list before we give it to the commissioners, anything that you want to recommend as one that you guys are most supportive of, or anything that's not on here. There's a lot of different versions of a modified membership. And And ultimately, the board's going to have the final decision, so all we can do is give them our 2 cents worth.
One of the things that we had discussed at, Judy Seltrick, one of the things that we had discussed at the subcommittee, and we really didn't have a quorum on the subcommittee, was that the importance that the commissioners felt for the members that were serving on the Animal Advisory Board. And one of the commissioners thought that it was most important to have a representative from the rescue groups, from the dogs or from the cats that pulled the most animals from Pet Resources. And then another one said that they would be most important to have the stakeholders that we have that are in our ordinances. And the very first and topmost importance from all of the commissioners is that they have control over the people that are representing them as a member of the Animal Advisory. So that would be most important. The least important was the general public. We had importance from making sure that we had representatives from all of our districts. And then, of course, the things that are mentioned on the stakeholders and on people that are representing the rescues. Does anybody have any questions on that?
So when do we provide our feedback to you to go to the board?
Hopefully tonight. If you need to postpone it, that's fine too, but
So we need to just take a minute, everybody look at it and then select?
I don't know about anyone else, but I was at the committee, and I think that it needs some mulling over. We have some other things that are coming up in November that Deborah has to provide us information on. If you all want to make a decision, that's absolutely fine with me. Does anyone have any questions, or does anybody have any suggestions that you would like to review? Wendy?
This is Wendy DePaul. I have a question. In option 2, what is a cat club member? I mean, I've heard of dog clubs, but I'm not sure I've heard of a cat club.
so that's what was in the original ordinance. So that's exactly word for word what's in the original ordinance when this committee was created. So I'm assuming that it's like a breed related, I don't know if they call them clubs or not, but I know there are breed related cat. We had a Persian group in Jacksonville. I'm sure there's some around here that are breed-specific cat
It's
groups.
not a training group.
I never heard of it. Okay.
They do, and they show them at the fairgrounds.
And what is considered an animal welfare organization?
I have no idea.
Animal rights, I guess I kind of figured that's like,
Yeah.
I get what that is, but I'm like, I kind of liked it, but then I don't know who those people are.
I guess, Mina Morgan, I would have a question about the 3 Hillsborough residents, non-affiliated with animal organizations, but why is one a non-pet owner?
Doesn't make sense.
Why would they
I think it makes
care?
sense. Because they're the ones that have to deal with other people's animals, and they probably have an opinion.
One of the things when I was calling all of the commissioners' offices, is they were really interested in having people that had knowledge about companion animals. And I think that, that would be the most important thing to have. And the other question that I have is, in the first option, and option 2, livestock and large animals. I don't believe that we deal with livestock and large animals here, do we?
That's the sheriff's department.
That's the sheriff's department. And excuse me, while we're discussing this, I had a hand, Susan, did you sign up, and did we? We have a member of the audience that would like to speak. Should we do that now or finish the discussion here?
Doesn't matter. You're the chair.
Susan? Go ahead. We can.
I didn't want to interrupt you if you want to finish.
All right, well, then we can finish up over here on option number 2. We don't have livestock any longer. For anybody who's looking at this, I did do a spreadsheet on when we did have changes, and I am going to send the spreadsheet on the changes to Gigi for you to follow, and then also my notes that we had at the subcommittee meeting. I didn't send them to you before the meeting, Gigi, but I will send them so that you have a copy of everything, and Lon, so that you'll have a copy of everything. Does anybody have any questions as to option 3 or anything else? Yes?
Do you want me to share the notes and the spreadsheet with the rest of the members?
Yeah. Yep. Anything that I have is for everybody else.
I have a question. Lawn, Humane Society, Tampa Bay. Scott, which one would you pick?
I think I'm leaning towards the option 3 by just adding, these one-year term people that would be, one cat rescue, one dog rescue, and then a volunteer that puts in the most hours. I think they're all stakeholders, but they don't always fit the traditional what the board might appoint. And honestly, they change from year to year. So, if you put one on for 4 years, that's a dog rescue, and then all of a sudden they decide to stop pulling from us, it kind of defeats the idea of them being vested in what we do.
Judy Seltrick. Scott, the one thing that, in speaking with the commissioners, is I feel very strongly all of our ordinances address people who have kennels, people who are dog trainers, people who are breeders, people who have pet stores. And I feel that it's very important that if we're representing the community, that we not only represent rescue, but we have equality, and that we represent the people who are the stakeholders in the ordinances, because they are directly affected. Comments?
Joanne O'Brien, what I wanted to know, do we put nominations in for a cat or a dog rescue to be on the board? How would that work?
Those would be the top people who pull from.
Okay, so like, for instance, like Cat Haven or one of those other ones, or St.
Yeah.
Francis?
Yeah, one of those. I don't know which one is the top. I think it might be cat. I forget what they're called. There's so many cat groups that have cat in their name. I can't remember which one was the top.
Well, I'm more familiar with Cat Haven,
Yeah.
yes.
Judy Seltrick. When I was thinking about the rescues and the request from one of the commissioners, I did ask for statistics from Craig Horner, and I CC'd a copy of that to you. And on the rescues, one of the commissioners thought that we had the rescues were taking 3,500 of the cats or 3,500 of the dogs and 4,500 of the cats. But that figure really wasn't a correct figure. That was the total of all of the animals that were adopted and rehomed. So Craig had provided me with a breakdown for January 1st of 2019 to September 30th of 2019. And rescue groups, we had a total of 2,289 animals that were pulled by rescue groups. 450 were cats, 230 were dogs. We had ferrets, 5 of them, and kittens. 1,489 kittens were pulled by rescue groups. Other 104 puppies, so that total again, 2,289. And that was out of a total of 8,437. So what that tells me is that 27% of all the kittens, puppies, other cats and dogs were pulled by rescue. Out of that, the top rescues were Rescue Cats of Florida, 858, Cat Haven Rescue, 224, Lived Per Another Day, 202, Happy Trails Rescue, Cat Rescue, 176. St. Francis Rescue, 165. Cat Call Rescue, 138. Ginger Williams, 112. Animal Loves Dream Rescue, 104. Luna Mars Animal Project Rescue, 69. And Rebels Rescue, 68. The top names are all cat rescue, and out of those totals, only 13% of the rescues are pulling adult animals, and wouldn't it be nicer if we could have a larger number on the adult animals? And maybe this would be an incentive for the rescues to pull animals from us. Kitties and puppies go very quickly, but not.
Well, and just so that everyone is clear, the majority of those 1,000 quote-unquote kittens are neonatal, so that they're pulling them because we can't put them up for adoption. Those are during kitten season where maybe they take mom and 6 kittens, or they take 6 kittens without a mom, but they got to grow them up. They're not old enough to be sterilized. They're not taking like 6-month-old kittens. They do, some of them, but the vast majority of that 1,000 are neonatals.
Thank you, Scott. I just thought there was a disparity in the number from what I was told from one of the commissioner's aides to what was realistically
Yeah,
happening.
there definitely was a misunderstanding of the numbers, yeah.
Thank you. Now, getting back to the options, does anyone else have any other questions?
Flag channels, I think, starting with option 4 and going through, starting with 3 and going to 4, I think if you get 18 members and 20 members and 22 members, that's just going to be
A mess.
very confusing.
I second.
Seems like an
Thank
odd
you.
number is better, too.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. Yes, I do agree with that. Do we have that many issues that would require that many people maybe we could modify one of these things so that we could have a rescue and a stakeholder, and that would take down the number. Scott, what do you think about that?
It's up to you guys to decide what you want to recommend. If we're going to, you've got some time if you want Gigi to send out the notes and everything, so we won't really be talking about this again until January, because that's our next meeting, so.
Okay, very good. Then, Gigi, then I will forward all of my notes from the subcommittee, my spreadsheets, my recommendations from the commissioner's aides, and we will provide that to all of the members and put it up for discussion in January.
If I could make
Yes.
just one comment, mine and Morgan. I haven't had dealings with them in a long time, but it seems like they would probably include extensive contact with breeders and trainers. Dog Training Club of Tampa, they have a lot of classes. I've seen a lot of pure breed dogs in there. I've seen a lot of rescues in there. It just seems like that might kind of have a large contact with, trainers and breeders, if we want them, their input included.
I think, Judy Saltrick, I believe that that's a very good recommendation. And I have gone to the Dog Training Club of Tampa before. They do have a new location. They are a wonderful group that does wonderful things on training dogs in a club setting. So I would be more than happy to go to them and talk with them and see what they would like to do. But I think they would be a very good representation.
And they have the puppy classes are so good there too.
Yeah.
Socializing, that I just think they might be a good one to have on the committee.
Thank you. Yes.
So Gigi's going to send out more information and notes for everyone, and then that's going to be our topic for next meeting.
Yes. Okay. Are we on next to the chairman's report? Yes. One of the things that I'd like to bring up to discussion is, for a lot of the year, we really didn't have anything to discuss, and it seems like since September, we got slammed with a bunch of things and a bunch of meetings. One of them had to do with the pet store ordinance. And Commissioner Hagan, Scott had called me in, and he wanted to have a definition of an ethical breeder and a non-ethical breeder. Well, I think anybody who is ethical is adhering to the care and conditions of what veterinarians are giving us as results on on how we should be treating our animals. What Mr. Mills will go and his investigators and take a look at and see how are they treating animals, and are they flea-ridden so that the animals are anemic. So ethical and unethical, I think, could be a small breeder, or it could be a large breeder. It could be any number of things, because you could have a black sheep in any category, whether it is a breeder, whether it is a rescue, or anything else that we have that's associated with the animals that we care with. One of the loopholes that Scott and Mr. Mills found was that when we had the subcommittee meeting for the pet store ordinance, and Wendy was in this with me as well as Dr. Layton, we did have a request that we had the USDA files on the breeders. During that time, the USDA was sued by the state of Texas and the horsemen in the state of Tennessee because of giving unredacted information, and animal extremists went to these individuals' farms or kennels or whatever and destroyed property, threatened lives. And I think that we know that that kind of thing will happen with extremism. We've experienced that with our own Pet Resources. So the material that Pet Resources is able to get is redacted to the point of not being able to see it. And the meetings that we've had with the stakeholders, the pet stores, they've come up with solutions on presenting USDA reports and having them available for Pet Resources. Now, one of the other problems that we have is that we talked about permits, and permits were something that we had in the past in Hillsborough County. The permits were done away with in 2000, in 2007 for the lack of funding. One of the things that we discussed at our meeting was to reinitiate the permits for breeders, kennels, rescues. If we take a look at the permit ordinance that we have at present, it includes rescues, but then there are exclusions in 15 paragraphs afterwards. One of the things that I discussed when we were thinking about the permitting process was the cost. And Mr. Mills thought he would require 6 investigators, an entry level of $35,000, and you have to figure that's probably a 33% benefit package when it comes to taxes and employee benefits. A supervisor, Scott thought that it would take 4 entry-level investigators, and then we have the automobiles. I thought maybe $35,000 for a vehicle, but I was informed afterwards that the vehicles would cost between $40,000 and $70,000. So now, instead of coming up to an estimate that I came up to of $549,000, we're up to $600,000. $600,000 for an isolated incident that how many people have we had with the 340 confiscation, and can we expect the taxpayer to pay the brunt of upwards of $600,000 to take care of someone that was taken care of by animal cruelty? My question to all of you, Mina and Wendy, you both are attorneys. Is it prudent, and as an accountant, is it prudent that we spend $600,000 for an incident such as the thing that we had with the Trish's grooming? Your recommendations?
I was just wondering if, since we have a state attorney who's up for reelection, if maybe the state attorney's office would want to get interested in, I mean, in having some part in having an investigator, that part of their job was assigned to checking on these situations. I mean, dogs and cats are very popular in election years. And they're really set up pretty well to do it because they'll know what would be classified as cruelty, and they can get warrants.
We can get warrants.
Yeah.
We just can't serve them.
Do you think the state attorney might be interested in taking some of that burden? No?
I think they like it the way it's set up now.
Judy Seltrick, I did speak with the state attorney's office on another thing that had to do with animal cruelty and our rules and regulations and what they do, and they thought that they had everything covered as well as any state attorney could have it covered. So if we can get more support, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But in my conversations, they felt that they were doing everything that they needed to do.
Well, and I think they like to see their role as being another layer. So realistically, we get thousands, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 reports of animal cruelty. The ones that are criminal probably can be counted less than 100. The ones that are actual cruelty is probably only about 10% of what's actually reported. A lot of it's simply somebody who doesn't like the way somebody else is managing their own pet. You know, the fact that they may not walk it 4 times a day, someone will report that as cruelty. The fact that, you know, they don't like the way it's been groomed. Maybe they shaved its hair off in the summer and it shouldn't have had its hair shaved off, or those are the kind of calls that you'll get. So somebody's got to weed through all of that stuff to get to where it's even legitimate. So we've got, you know, regular animal control officers who do the first layer. Then we've got trained cruelty investigators that usually will take it when it looks like it's going to be a legitimate case. And then when it's criminal, we do bring the state attorney in on it. And so we sort of, at that point, are acting almost like the state attorney's investigators at that point.
If it's one that's, you know, as silly as you shouldn't have shaved the dog down for the summer or something, I mean, and would it be possible that if you get volunteers to take that first tier of calming down the complainant and talking to the person and, you know, telling them why it might be a good idea not to do that, even though this neighbor is, you know, it's none of their business, but they might want to read a little bit about it or consider it anyway?
So there's
So you're not
a
wasting
few
your
potential,
personnel
there's a
for-
few potential issues with that, because I know I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of things have come up for discussion at, like, the Florida Animal Control Association. An animal control officer has to be certified by the state of Florida. And so you can send a volunteer out, but they would have very limited ability to do anything. And then the question is, you know, whose liability is it going to be if they do or say something that's incorrect, or if they decide they're going to take an animal when they don't have the authority to take an animal? And who are you going to screen? Because we all know there are very zealous people out there, and they would be out doing things that are above and beyond what the law actually would, you know. Some of those are the same people who call and say they don't like the way the dog was shaved. You know, so it becomes really difficult, and it's why most places don't have Volunteers, if they do have volunteers, they typically ride along with an officer, just so there's a supervising, there's just so many things that people can potentially do that would violate somebody's rights, and if they're an agent of the county, then the county's on the hook for it.
Judy Seltert, and I think that we're dealing with a lot of subjective information, because some people will buy a Labrador Retriever or a Husky, and then when the summer comes, they want the dog shaved, or they don't want hair in their house, so they'll shave it down. And some groomers, in fact, I have a friend who is a master groomer, she would never, ever shave down a German Shepherd or a Labrador, because it's not what is meant to happen with the dog. There are other better grooming techniques, but you know, we're dealing with the subjective opinion of who wants to have their dog
And we
shaved.
might not have all that information up front. We may simply have cruelty, and then when the officer goes out is when we find out that the issue they have is that the person didn't shave the dog right. You know, they may not tell us that right away because they probably know we're not likely to come out over something like that. So, you know, what they tell us on the phone and what we find out when we actually get out there often is way different. And then a lot of times we get out there and realize it has nothing to do with the animal at all. It's a neighborhood dispute between two neighbors, and they're using the animals as a way to try to get someone to poke at their neighbor. And they do the same thing with code enforcement, and, you know, pretty much every agency gets those type of calls that, you know, are really not truly legitimate call for that agency, and you know, you do your best to try to screen those out, but you know, they pop up, and it's the best way to find them is to go out and talk with the people, because it doesn't take you very long to realize, you know, my neighbor called code enforcement on me, so I'm calling animal control on them, and you know, it becomes that sort of thing, and then you try, you know, to say, you know, you guys got to get along because we're not there to be in the middle of that stuff. And you know, there are some mediation services and stuff that we can recommend. I don't know how well they work, but I've seen it work in some cases, depending on what type of neighborhood dispute it is. Sometimes nothing will, short of one of the two of them moving, you know, the Hadfields and the McCoys, there's plenty of those situations out there too, that's so deep that you can't figure out whatever started it.
Human rabies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Deborah is here today, and
Public comment.
yes, I'm just going to finish up this, and then
Oh,
we're going to
okay.
do it. But on the pet store ordinance, I just wanted to finish up on this. The pet store ordinance that Commissioner Hagan wanted us to take a look at was really, in my opinion, not a pet store ordinance issue, because the people who had the dogs confiscated had been enjoined from owning dogs. They did not pass the permitting years ago when we did the permitting. They were refused to be grandfathered in to be a pet store, and they were a terrible pit in my stomach excuse for being a breeder, not what is representative of the breeders that I know. And what I thought is that, couldn't we just simply, and I do things simple, and they're probably not always the best when it comes to legal things, but couldn't we simply say that no person, entity, or corporation enjoined or convicted of animal cruelty may own or operate any business related to kennels, rescue, breeding, or other services provided to animals, and that further, no family member, individual, person, or corporations may act as their alter ego or subterfuge for the enjoined or convicted person in Hillsborough County. The person who was originally enjoined had her family, and tell me, ladies, if this is the proper terminology, acting as her alter ego, Her family was the corporation. Her son-in-law was the owner of the corporation, and he had been previously convicted of animal cruelty. Now, maybe it was dismissed. I'm not certain of all of that particulars. But it would seem to me that if we had something simple in our ordinance that if you've been enjoined, there has to be, you can't have your family member do the business. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I think that we could do something in a simple matter that isn't going to cost the taxpayer $600,000.
Mine, what I see is that you're infringing on the rights of the family member, who actually might be a decent person, especially if they had sense enough to leave home. I mean, you'd have to show that. I don't think you could enjoin someone from being involved in those businesses simply because they're related to someone who is a known repeat offender.
But that repeat offender was the person who was managing the business.
That's going to be hard to. That's going to be a question of fact, and it's going to be harder to prove.
So what's the easiest way that we could do it without costing the taxpayer money?
Well, let me clarify a couple of things for the people who might be watching, because I don't want us to get 1,000 calls tomorrow saying this is what was said at the AAC. So the person who is the owner of record of the dogs that were confiscated is Robert Royers. Robert Royers was not enjoined at the time that the business was operating. He currently is enjoined as a result of this case. But there was nobody there that owned animals that was enjoined from owning. He was, whatever relation he was to the person who was enjoined is not really a material fact in this particular case. The case was, you're the owner and these animals are in bad care. Now, the reason that this other enjoined owner was allowed to work with animals is that was what the court order told us. The court carved that piece out of an enjoinment. Typically we say you can't possess, be around, you try to pretty much put the person and the animal apart, but that's not what the judge who brought the enjoinment against the person said. They carved that piece out and said, we don't want to deny her livelihood, and therefore she can work with animals, she just can't own them. And then you get into that whole legal question of, if you're working with them, are you possessing? It's kind of a really ugly exception to have to an enjoinment, and it's really, honestly, the first one that I've seen in all the time that I've done this.
And how many years is that, Scott?
It's over 20.
Over 20 years. So the first that you've seen in 20 years, the first that we've seen in Hillsborough County, and how long?
Well, I don't know. This case has been dragging on for a long time. We don't typically have anybody who's enjoined that is got any kind of restriction other than maybe it's a time-limited enjoinment. So sometimes a judge will say they're enjoined for the next 5 years as opposed to forever. But the vast majority of our enjoinments are permanent enjoinments until they go back. They have the option to go back to court and get the judge to lift the enjoinment if, good example, they were young kids doing something really stupid. Now they're 30 years old and they can prove to the judge they've been an upstanding citizen for the last 15 years and they want to own a pet because they're having a kid for the first time or something. Judges will sometimes reconsider that. But I've never seen anybody given the ability to work with animals when they've been enjoined for the care, for how they cared for animals. It kind of seems contradictory to the enjoinment, but this lady was apparently a groomer, and I think the judge felt that grooming really wasn't quote-unquote care as far as like feeding and that, but the complication is what she was actually doing and what the judge is ordered. The way I read the judge's order, I don't think the two jive, but nobody brought that forward at the time of the enjoinment, and by the time I came on, that enjoinment was 15 years old, so it wasn't like I could go back and say, I need someone to reinterpret this because I didn't have any grounds for that at the time. You know, it's something that is clearly a concern of ours moving forward, that carve-out piece does not seem appropriate to us, especially now that this person was considered the manager of this animal operation and the animals were in bad shape. So who should ultimately be held responsible? The owner and the manager and anybody who's caring for those animals.
So the question then again is, what are we willing for our taxpayers to pay for an isolated incident? Are we going to recommend that we put the permitting process back in? I can tell you that the breeders that I know were absolutely loving to have their certificate, their gold stars, stating that they had an excellent kennel. But the other comment that I have had from these specific breeders is that if they are going to be included again now, that they want to make sure that there aren't any exclusions for the rescues and for anyone else that is operating in Hillsborough County. And I think that that is a valid request, and the money just keeps on coming back to me. We are at a $2 million increase in pet resources, $2.4 million, and now we'd add another $600,000 to that. Is that something that the taxpayers are going to be happy about? Is that something that the commissioners are going to want to entertain? It's your money. You're the taxpayers.
This is Wendy DePaul. It doesn't really make a difference because we can't make that decision. I mean, we don't have any control over what money goes where. I mean, and they just gave you all that money. I don't know if they're going to give you another $600,000. You know, and there's nothing we can do about it, sitting on the committee.
Well, that was just my comment on it. That is, I do have some other things that I could give it a comment later on to afford public comment. But that was everything that I had to discuss about the pet store ordinance and the permitting. Ms. Smith?
Good evening. My name is Susan Smith. I'm the president of the Florida Association of Kennel Clubs, and I represent many of the dog clubs here in Hillsborough County, as well as throughout the state of Florida.
Could you speak into the microphone? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Is it working?
I think it's working, yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Do you need me to restate what I already said, Wendy?
Do you need that, Joanne? Are you okay? I think you can continue.
Okay. I just, I've been working with Scott and Deborah and some other groups here. Part of it was as a result of the situation with the confiscation and maybe reinstating the permit process that was defunded in 2007. And speaking with some of our stakeholders, I just have some things to address in the ordinance that is in effect at this particular time. One is Section 662, which is additional retail sale regulations for existing pet shops, and this is under D3. And the ordinance reads, an animal shelter or animal rescue may request that the existing pet shop pick up the stray, abandoned, or unwanted dog and or cat being held in their care within 3 days of the date of the request, and the existing pet shop shall be responsible for the regular and customary fees to reclaim the pet. I was on the subcommittee when that was being worked on the pet store ordinance. And during discussions with staff in the subcommittee, which I was part, regarding existing pet shops, dogs and or cats, PRC did not want to have said animals come into and be under the responsibility of PRC. The pet shop would be required to implant a microchip for for identification purposes. The intent was the pet shop would be notified when an animal came into PRC and would forthwith pick up said animal. No mention was discussed regarding animal rescue or PRC adopting out the animal in lieu of notifying the pet shop. The terms may and animal rescue should be deleted, and shall should replace may. These were just, we did have an issue with one of the pet shops, so that's why I'm bringing that up. The other is under Section 6172 definition. Abuse offense shall, this is in your ordinance, abuse offense shall mean the commission of any act that constitutes the criminal offense of, and this is number 6, confinement of animals without sufficient food, water, or exercise under Florida Statute 828.13. And this should have been used in the recent confiscation of the 340 dogs. It's my understanding that the court case was based on cruelty charges. There is no need for the knee-jerk reaction to punish responsible, ethical, purpose-bred, purebred dog breeders by labeling them commercial breeders if not regulated by the USDA as proposed. And then under Section 6-201 definitions, dog training business shall mean a
Sorry.
Am I allowed to finish that?
Yes.
All right. This is also in your ordinance. Dog training business shall mean a business that performs a dog training outside the presence or observation of the owner at the time the dog training services are provided. Some trainers who offer services with the owners training their dogs for titles and/or to be better companions are being visited, meaning inspected, and it's suggested they acquire a permit. This is not the intent of the ordinance, and it should stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is legal questions and concerned. Deborah Cromartie.
She's the president.
Deborah Cromartie, Mency, Senior Assistant County Attorney, County Attorney's Office. I am happy to answer whatever questions I can. I was just asked to come and be here and help in whatever way that I can.
Judy Seltrick. Deborah, did you discuss with Scott some of the items that he found in the draft of the pet store ordinance?
Yes, we did have a discussion.
And were there going to be revisions?
Yeah, there are revisions that are being proposed. We need to get a report back full of our recommendations by November 6th, and we're working on that draft now. Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? It probably would have been good if we had a draft of the pet store ordinance for the members of the AAC that we didn't provide, and I didn't have my copy with me.
Well, technically, we don't have a draft yet. We have a report, a draft report, but we're still meeting with commissioners, and until we meet with all the commissioners, we won't have a actual draft of anything because the conversations are changing rapidly as we discuss it with different commissioners. So until we speak with all the commissioners, Deborah and I really have no singular focus right now. We've got to find out what the input is and then bring back possibly a draft, possibly a list of potential things, because what two commissioners may want may be mutually exclusive. And so it's kind of premature for us to be drafting something when we've only spoken with 2 of 7 commissioners.
And this has to be done by November 6th?
Not a draft ordinance, it's just a draft report.
A draft report?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am, that sets forth our recommendations for any changes that we're proposing.
And Deborah, when Scott, when we met with the people from the pet store, they were supposed to have input, and they were going to be provided with this draft report. Are they meeting with you, or are they going to be given this report prior to November 6th?
I don't have a scheduled meeting with them. And I believe your other question was, were we going to submit a report to them?
They had asked for copies, I believe, didn't they, Scott?
Yeah, of whatever draft. I'm just checking. I thought I saw a meeting set up.
I mean, once it's finalized and it's on the agenda, we're happy to provide them with what the public will receive. I mean, that's not a problem at all. It's still a work in progress. As Scott said, we've only met with 2 commissioners so far. The agenda deadline is Friday. There's another deadline next week, which is the final deadline. We're hoping to be able to have as close to a draft as possible, as soon as possible, so that we can get it on the agenda. So that's where we are. Everything is still up in the air.
Deborah, are you at liberty to say which commissioners you've met with so far?
Sure. Commissioner Hagan and Commissioner Overman.
Thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any questions from Deborah?
Yes. So in other words, it's not an agenda item as of yet for November 6th?
We plan on it being an agenda
Okay.
item, yes, ma'am, but it has not been formulated yet.
Okay, I
Yes.
just wanted to be sure on that because I was told would more than likely be on the agenda.
Oh, yes, it has to be by November 6th. That's the trigger date. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Sure.
and what I was trying to get across is that, you know, if we give everybody a draft every time we make a change of the draft, what ends up inevitably happening when we show up on the 6th is you lied to us because this is the draft that you gave me. And so I think we need to wait till we have something that's closer to the draft, because if it changes dramatically, there will be someone standing up there saying, look, this is what you told me on October 23rd, but between October 23rd and October 31st or whenever our deadline for filing the thing is, you know, I might have another 5 meetings and things could change dramatically. So, you know, we'll get the drafts out when the drafts are at that point. I mean, technically, everything we do is public record, but when you get it in its broken state, don't be shocked that that's not what it looks like when it's final.
Joanne O'Brien, what I was thinking, from my understanding, I thought they may write an ordinance and maybe get, you know, tougher on these pet stores or these puppy mills. I don't know where they're going with that.
We don't know where they're going with it either. What they ask us to do is bring back a draft of, you know, anything that we saw as potential holes in the current
Okay.
laws and any other recommendations, but it was pretty broadly out there. And then as we start talking to commissioners, I think different commissioners may have understood it differently, you know, because it was very open, or maybe they understood it the same way we did, but they're like, well, if we're going to talk about it, then let's talk about other things as well. So, you know, it's very much up in the air for us right now. And then ultimately, all we're going to be doing is saying, here's some real broad, we're not writing an ordinance and handing it to them on the 6th. The 6th is when they would then say, well, out of this list, we want A, B, and D, now go write us a draft ordinance and bring it back whenever. And you know, it would be hard for us to bring it back too quickly because it just, the logistics of.
You have to be careful with that.
Yeah, and you know, and if they advise that they want it to come back here, you know, we're going to either have to schedule another meeting or it won't come back here until January, because that's our next meeting.
Because I know some people want to see tougher ordinances, and that's what I've been hearing out there in the field, some wranglings, and I say no comment.
Yeah, at this point, all we're supposed to be doing is like fact gathering and give them a list of those facts.
Deborah, do you have anything else to add?
No, ma'am.
Thank
Was
you.
There
What- go ahead.
there was some question last meeting that,
Good Samaritan law.
something about Good Samaritan, does anybody remember?
Oh, yes. I brought that up because when I call it doggy court. So when I went to doggy court, the people who turned in the call to Pet Resources about a dog that was malnourished and dying, they were going to be sued by the attorney for the people for entering the person's property. And they asked me if this had anything to do with the Good Samaritan law, and I said, I don't know.
I'm not certain either, just based on what you told me, but I did get, I guess, a heads up that you all were interested in the Good Samaritan law and the implications of helping or assisting animals in need of care, and found that there are two statutes on the book that deal with animal rescues. One is, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the scenario of people breaking windows so they can get to an animal in a car. That's one of them, and that's found at section 768.139. And in that particular definition, in that particular statute, it defines domestic animal as being any dog, cat, or other animal that is domesticated and may be kept as a household pet. And there are about 5 or 6 criteria that someone would have to follow in order to not be found civilly liable for the damage to the car or potentially the damage to whatever care or treatment they provide to the animal that they're rescuing. So that's one. Not necessarily a part of the Good Samaritan law, but very similar and affiliated. And the other is the Good Samaritan law. And just in 2016, prior to 2016, let me say, it was only pertaining to humans. Whatever care you provide to a human that is in need of some emergency treatment or care or attention, as of 2016, the Florida statute, the Florida legislature added the provision that extended to animals. And what it says is that any person, including those who are licensed vets, who gratuitously and in good faith render emergency care or treatment to an injured animal at the scene of an emergency or on or adjacent to a highway, shall not be held liable for civil damages as a result of such care or treatment or as a result of any act or failure to act in providing the care or treatment if the person acted as a reasonably prudent person. Basically, anyone under those particular under that particular scenario would have acted in the same way. But it seems to be limited to an emergency scene on or adjacent to a highway or roadway. So those are the two, I guess, legal provisions that I found in Florida law that pertain to the Good Samaritan theory.
Well, I guess if they were walking down the sidewalk next to a street, and if they saw that the dog was dying, they just might be able to be stretched in that manner.
Yes, adjacent to a roadway. I would think a sidewalk would probably fall under that.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Wendy, did you have a question? No? Okay. Truth and training update?
Well, I know we've been working on, Roger Mills, they've been working on adding some enforcement regulation to it, and some capabilities of trying to obtain data from USDA in a more timely fashion. And that would be via the pet store owners Is that the one we were talking about?
No, we're talking about the truth in training.
The stuff you were working on with the website and.
Oh, the website, yeah, I'm sorry, got it mixed up there. So, yes, we were working on getting the website updated to add in the people that train and then people that are employed by them added to into that location where people could actually go on to the website. And if they wanted to say, look at one of the training facilities and who works for them and what type of experience or education they may have, they'd be able to pull that right off the website.
Okay. Judy Seltrick, the people always call me. So when I was taking a look at the tax records, I saw that there were 25 kennels and 27 trainers on the tax records. And on our online website, we have 17 businesses that are licensed as trainers. And I didn't know what the discrepancy was. The other item that people have called me about is they said, we've paid for our license. It says in the ordinance that we're supposed to get our certificate or our little gold star or whatever the letter is within 30 days. And I don't think that we're in compliance with that. I know that you have been working diligently on it, but this is the comment that I've received
I know
from
they have
individuals.
been some of them that didn't have all their information in, is why they did not receive their certificates, and that was we were trying to accomplish that, to obtain all their information, whether it be background checks or whatever it was that we needed. And then the difference between what was on our list and what was on the tax records, we sent out registered letters to all them, and there was a few of them that come back that were no longer in business, or there was not operating a dog training facility. And I believe there was only 2 or 3 that actually were needed to be signed up, and we took care of those. But most of them were either in business anymore or did not do any type of dog training.
Okay. The other question that I have was on the truth and training ordinance, on the page 1, when it comes to the definitions, was the thing that Ms. Smith was talking about, was that the dog training business shall mean a business that performs training outside or the presence or observation of the owner. And then in section 6-2.203, dog training exemptions, we have specialized competition dog training, including but not limited to conformation, agility, and sport dog training, and then dog training by not-for-profit in item number D. The question that I always get, because in the dog training arena, there are people that will train their puppies for a puppy star as a prerequisite to agility for dog training. They do it in a group. There are people who will do a canine good citizen, a canine good citizen, I think it's excellent, and a canine good citizen urban as a prerequisite to their rally classes or their agility classes, and these are all prerequisites. And our intention when we did the ordinance was not to include those individuals. And they've called me and they said, why is my business, why do I have to have a business license? Why do I have to have a trainer's license? I'm supposed to be exempted under the ordinance. And I think that we need to take a look at that. Does everyone know what I'm talking about?
Well, and I'll tell you the difference is this. So a business requires a background check on a person, where a regular trainer only requires you to sign a form saying that you have never been found guilty of a animal cruelty violation. So the difference is basically that. So if you run a business and you hire people, you're a business, and you hire 5 people, I think you should have background checks done on them, because you really are taking their word for it that they're signing the form saying they haven't never been arrested. So that was our interpretation of it. Is if you're running a business and you hire 7 or 8 people, what's to say that none of them have been arrested? So I thought that, to me, that shouldn't be changed. You know, if it's a single person, they're doing training and they don't have the animal staying there overnight or whatever, and you're sitting there with them and it's some one person, that's fine. But if you got multiple people you're employing, I think you need to you need to take more care in ensuring that you have a person there that's doing the training properly.
I understand that, and the individual that I'm speaking of only has a business name so that she can host shows, because the shows are under the business name, and all of the training is done with groups, with this person as the trainer, and she's basically teaching the people how to train their dogs. And it would be under the type of sports that we had originally exempted under the ordinance. So I think that, you know, maybe there needs to be a clearer understanding of what kind of trainers there are so that we're not doing that. On the flip side, I did speak to an individual who told me that he is very glad to send in his training techniques with the equipment that he is using, and that he hopes that you all aren't just putting them in a folder and not doing anything with them, because he is very proud that he has gathered the statistics on the training mechanisms that he is using, and he's able to quantify that with the people that are coming to him for training to show them what kind of equipment shows results, what type of training techniques do results. So, you know, they will call me on nice things and on things that they do have other questions on.
But once the website is complete, that will be the main focal point of it. It will list each individual and their experience and training on the website so people could look at that and base their selection on the information that's there.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. The next thing is a hoarding case update.
Okay?
What is that?
You updated it earlier.
Are we talking the breeder, or are we talking a hoarding case? Because that's not a hoarding situation, that's a breeding situation.
I don't know, this says hoarding
The
case
one from you
update.
talked about from last week, the 350-something.
Yeah, that's not I wouldn't classify that as a hoarding situation. That was a irresponsible breeder, whatever you want to call it, but that was a commercial business that was breeding for profit. And, you know, we still have pending legal situation there, so I'm not sure exactly what kind of an update we can give you without going into potentially.
Have they surrendered the dogs?
No, but we did get custody. We did get full custody yesterday of the dogs. So now we can start to do some of the stuff that we had to hold off on until they were our custody, but it's going to take us a little while to get them all sterilized and stuff. So all the rumors that we're adopting them are not true. We will eventually adopt them, but we've got other things. You know, we were kind of at arm's length of what we could and couldn't do when they weren't technically our property. So now that they are our property, we can start working on some of those things. So we're doing, you know, we had done some washing of some of the dogs before, but now some of those dogs really need to be shaved down, and we were waiting until we had custody before we did that, because it wasn't that they were matted, it's just that their fur is so badly stained that it's never gonna look like it's supposed to until it grows back in. So, you know, the thought is at this point we might as well shave them down and let them get a nice, fresh, new coat. So I saw some grooming starting. A lot of washing has taken place. A lot more is needed. I mean, 350 dogs take a long time to wash, but we were.
You're getting a good use out of that new tub, huh?
Yes, and we're learning some finesse on our dryers and things like that, because the building is going to need some modifications for things like grooming and laundry that we didn't really anticipate having to have on site there. But now with this big of a case, we realize that it's impractical to move stuff back and forth between the investigation facility and the main shelter. So, longer term, we've got some modifications. So it's been a learning experience for us. But all in all, the animals are doing 100% better than I would have ever guessed. In a breeding situation where they're crammed in cages, you'd expect them to not really like people or be afraid of people, and it's not the case. The vast majority of them are very affectionate. They're looking for attention. Yeah, they're going to have some issues with learning where the appropriate place to go to the bathroom is and isn't, but some of them are already starting to, you give them a big enough cage, some of them naturally are going where they're not sleeping, some aren't.
Yeah.
So but all in all, the fact that they're like craving attention is really kind of surprising given a general idea of what happens in puppy mills. You usually kind of don't like people, but they get kind of scared when you touch them the first time and their eyes are like in terror, but as they start to realize, hey, this actually kind of feels good that I'm getting petted, you can literally see their body posture change from all tense to like, oh man, now don't stop.
The nice thing about dogs is that they are not like us human beings where they remember things and may have had a bad experience. They're in the moment. And it's a nice thing that you all are doing all of the nice little touchy-feely things because they like that and they will respond to that. So thank you, Scott.
Well, and, I think I might have mentioned this last time, but if not, I'll mention it, and I'll mention it again and again. We've had groups like Red Rover and SARC out there helping us, and without it, a lot of what we've been able to accomplish wouldn't have been possible because we just don't physically have the number of people. So they were starting to teach potty training, putting the puppy pads out to try to get them to understand that's where, so that introducing them with toys, food toys, enrichment, getting them out and handling them. Clearly, we didn't have the staffing to do all of what we normally do every day and 350 additional dogs.
Have they been allowed out on the grass before, or were they all just,
They were not prior to us getting them, but we're starting that. There was we did some media a few days ago where they came out and filmed us having the dogs out playing with toys. And it's kind of funny because some of them take the toys right away and some of them got no idea what they should be doing with a toy. But it was kind of a cute little video. I saw it on a couple of different channels. There's this one poodle, Chinese crested, that is the weirdest looking. He looks like a poodle except he's got some like Chinese crested coming out, so he's like a black curly poodle with these long white hairs that come out.
So he's a powder puff then?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
More than a powder puff?
There's a bird in Africa that looks like, that's called a secretary bird, and it has feathers and flies up.
I mean, it's really cute, but I've never seen anything that looked like it before.
Okay, are we on now to other business?
Yep.
Follow up on any old business? Scott?
Not that I can think of. I mean.
No? Topics for the next meeting?
Follow up on the AAC new staffing, new option.
Yeah, and by then you'll have more info, so.
So how do we, so once do we need to submit our input to you before that meeting, or we're going to decide at that
We
meeting?
can decide at the meeting.
I always have something. For our veterinarians here, I was at a seminar this weekend at the University of Florida, and I know that everybody here loves their pets, but I want to tell you, the cardiology seminar that we attended, it was just unbelievable, and the results from and it has to do with the grain-free dog food and the grain dog food. The small study groups. And I'm sure that you all are getting more information than me, and I'm not a vet, so I'm telling everybody, go to your vet and talk to your vet about this. At the University of California at Davis, 23 out of 24 dogs that were diagnosed with DCM, dilated cardiomyopathy, improved when they had their grain-free dog food taken away and they were given dog food with grains. 9 out of 11 dogs that had congestive heart failure improved after they were put on diets with grain, and they didn't have any recurrence of congestive heart failure. At the University of Florida, they're doing a study, and it is funded by our wonderful AKC Health Foundation. And what they found, and I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a small number in comparison, that the dogs all had echocardiograms when they first started. And you saw these great big round basketball hearts when the dogs started. And then from 3 to 9 months, they took echocardiograms, and they had the pictures up on the screen to show us the improvement in the heart all the way up to, some of them were at the 9-month period where they had a normal oval-shaped heart and they didn't have any mitral valve regurgitation. Who would have known? At the University of Sydney, they told my niece that it was a great idea that's gone bad. So I think that a lot of studies have to be made, but it's something, are you all finding this with your clients? So interesting.
Jillian Arambula. I agree. It's very interesting, and like you said, it's, it was good intentions. I think that just kind of went awry, and definitely more information and more studies are needed. But I think it's great what the university's doing, and the more information that we can garner to better advise on nutrition for our pets, the better.
Oh, it's just phenomenal.
So there's one thing that I should have added to my report that I didn't. We had a delegation here from Puerto Rico today. They spent all day with us. They are shelter managers, directors, whatever they call themselves, some from humane societies, some from municipal shelters. And we were asked by the University of Florida and Maddie's fund to kind of mentor and answer questions. And, it's like so foreign to us when you listen to, their problems and their budget and their government issues compared to what we have. And I told them, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there have been times in that 20 years where I've had a little bit of an inkling of what they've been going through, but, they're taking in like 6,000 animals and have maybe a $200,000 budget, so they hardly have any employees. And so they've got a lot of challenges, but as a result of that, a lot of their challenges are both cultural down there, as far as what is and isn't considered acceptable, and honestly, just support of the shelter and knowing what a shelter does and doesn't do. And they're a lot overwhelmed with people who are fleeing. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to leave my pet with you because I can't take it when I go to Tampa or wherever they're moving to. But it was a really good meeting. They spent the full day with us. We got to show them all of the stuff. It was nice that we had our large impound because most of them haven't been involved in something like that, so they got to see that aspect. But was a good meeting. I think we gave them some ideas. I didn't want to scare them to say, you're not going to get to be like our shelter overnight. From $200,000 to a $12 million budget is a big leap. But I think that we're able to give them some good starting pointers, and we committed to, in today's world, you can Skype and you can teleconference and whatever. So, obviously we'd love to see them come visit again, but we're also going to follow up with them electronically so that we can help mentor them as best we can. But it was an honor for us to be chosen as, they could pick in a lot of shelters across the United States, and they decided, to pick ours. And I think that we gave them some glimmer of hope of what maybe their future might look like, and we were able to give them some of our experience when we did have low live outcome numbers.
It sounds like a good story for La Gazzetta to cover that meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, we had Telemundo came,
Yeah.
the county had some of their people out there as well. So we got a little bit of coverage. They took a bunch of pictures, so I'm sure they'll post it on their stuff. And they all wanted to know, like, are you going to do a Facebook Live when you do the adoption event? Because we want to see what's going on. But it was very eye-opening for us to look at, some of their real basic issues, and the fact that their budgets are so small that they try to supplement their budget by having like affordable vaccination clinics, but then that takes away from their other mission. It was like, well, you got to kind of decide what your focus is, because they were kind of all over the place, and they just didn't sound like they were getting as much government support. But I can tell you 20 years ago wasn't a whole lot different in this country. The world's changed a lot in 20 years here.
Scott, I think that's fantastic, and I think that it would be a great idea to get something going and drum up some money and, get them some money for their vaccinations and things. And then I think that you should ask all of the commissioners that you and Roger and your staff can go over there to train them. And Gigi should go as well, and she can be your interpreter. Now, don't you think that's one of the best things I've said all day long? I wanted to say one more thing, because this is going to be my last full evening as being the chair of the Animal Advisory Committee. And I don't know if all of you know on how all of the times that I have called and bothered Scott, calls that were wanted and calls that were unwanted, and he very graciously and maybe, put up a front on some of the phone calls that I made with him. But I promise you that if you take calls from me next year when I am not the chair, that I will still make Gołąbkis. And I promise Roger that I will limit my phone calls, because he is a go-to man. I appreciate everyone, but these three people that are here are my go-to people. And last but not least, the most important is Gigi. Scott, I don't know, because I've had administrative assistants, on how lucky you are to have Gigi as your administrative assistant, and Roger, the things that Gigi does for you. And if I call Gigi, she is there on the phone, and I said, Gigi, could you do that for me? She said, I've already got it done. She is the person who is the backbone, and when we had the meeting on the subcommittee, she was the one who knew everything on what the other advisory committees were doing. So, Gigi, my heart goes out to you. And I'm teaching her Polish, because every time I call, I will say something in Polish, and I never have a phone call or a presentation that I don't get a giggle and a laugh out of you. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Now, if there isn't anything further, could I have a motion to adjourn?
Wendy DePaul, I move we adjourn.
All right, we will see you
Next year.
next year. And it's going to be, have a nice Turkey Day, have a very Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year.